Please welcome your host, John Coleman.
Hi everyone. Just a reminder of why this show runs every day. If you get value out of the live broadcast or the recording, we're doing this for a very good cause, Agile with Ukraine. Their website is agilewithukraine.com. And they're fundraising for life-saving equipment, for humanitarian help, and for medical help. And I'd like to see more donations going through if you're really getting value out of this. If you've got any questions you want to submit as well, maybe you can do that, but maybe give us an extra donation. We'd really appreciate that. Thank you so much. So if you want to submit a topic, you can just comment on whichever social stream that you're on. And I'll be glad to add your question to the backlog. I've got a nice healthy backlog of questions at the moment. I'm very happy to feature your question, or even do it live as well if it's relevant to what I'm talking about. All right, so the question that I had for today was, from a flow perspective, it would seem completing 85% of the work of items inside the sprint boundary would be a good thing and allow the organization to trust a delivery forecast, right? And I want to break that question up a little bit, because there's it's what I refer to as a loaded question, because in Scrum we have a product goal. There's an assumption they're talking about sprints, so I presume they're using Scrum, something like that. And so if you have a product goal, that gives you a sense of direction. Where are we going? You try to use empiricism to figure out if your goal is wrong. And then your sprint goals should really be iterating towards that product goal. And then if you discover, of course, that the product goal, you've got enough out of that one and maybe you should move on to another one, then you can form a new product goal, and then the next sprint goals head towards that as well. Welcome, Parvis, on Instagram. The thing is that in Scrum, we don't commit to the items within the sprint. We commit to sprint goals. So if your team is delivering the sprint goal, I think we're good. But if you're only delivering 85% of your sprint goal, is that good? It depends, because just like not every item in your product backlog has to be for the product goal, not every item in the sprint backlog has to be for the sprint goal. So you could actually have a situation where there's 6 items in the sprint backlog and only 3 of them are for the sprint goal. They're all important items, all those 6 items, but if you run into trouble during the sprint, you know which 3 you're going to sacrifice, the ones that are not attached to the sprint goal. Okay, so that's the first thing. It's Scrum is goal-oriented. You got a product goal, you got a sprint goal, so it's not just about the number of items, but there is some merit in what this questioner asked. So I'm showing our workflow here for those of you who see this on video. And I'll just do a kind of an audio description for everybody else. And in here, there's a kind of a workflow where there's a backlog. There's a kind of a to-do, which would be kind of in Scrum. We might have some of these product backlog items or whatever. But in this case, they decided to use a Kanban board for what items do we say we do in the sprint that we haven't done yet. And then they've got a couple of in-progress states, in progress 1 and progress 2. And then they've got a shipped column for they actually like shipping things during the sprint, which is kind of nice. And they've got review outcomes as well. So they're very outcome oriented, which is really nice. And in this case as well, they have a cycle time. And the cycle time is on the border between backlog and to do here. and on the border between shipped and review outcomes. I really like this because they're actually getting stuff out the door. It makes it tricky. What does done mean? Because it means it's already shipped in this case, right? But we won't get into that too much today. And you can see a legend there as well, the top right corner. You can have a service level expectation for your Kanban board. A service level expectation is essentially it's not a service level agreement because that would be too strong, but it's kind of like it is an expectation, is what it says in the tin, really. So what we need to do here then is we need to communicate how long it takes when an item comes out of backlog in this case, and it goes to do, and it gets all the way to shipped and to review, to start reviewing outcomes. How long does that take? You can have a service level expectation for your board, but it's also completely okay and I would say advisable, particularly in non-software, where you got different types of work. So here you got the yellow work, the blue work, and the green work, and they have different different service level expectations because they're different types of work. And you can have an overall one for the overall board, and that's fine. So the first thing about the service level expectation is it's for a single item. It's not for multiple items. So if you decide during a sprint to bring an item in, you can do that. You should ask all sorts of questions like, is the sprint goal going to be at risk by doing this? Is there anything else we can do? Does our SLE, the remaining number of days, does that kind of fit with inside the sprint comfortably, and so on? Anything else we can do? You should really try and avoid bringing any new work in. There's always something to be cleaned up and so on. But if you decide you want to bring something in because, you know what, it's a red item and they normally take 3 days or less, 85% of the time, you've got 4 days to go, you can probably bring it in as long as you're not compromising the sprint goal. And that was always the case in Scrum, actually, but it's just that we don't really have any evidence to support whether we can bring a red item in, and we don't use Kanban or Scrum because we don't have any data, or we probably don't have any data. So here we do have data, so it means we can have a data-informed decision about whether it's sensible to bring an item in. So the service level expectation is about whether one item can move from here and will it get done by the end of the sprint, basically, because we want to have a done increment at the end of the sprint. We don't want to compromise a situation where we don't have a done increment at the end of the sprint. So that's a forecast for a single item, the service level expectation, which can start with a guess. Well, we think this item takes this long, but over time there'll be data, there'll be some kind of cycle time scatter plot, and you'll be able to draw a line at a certain point that, you know, these items, 85% of them are in this days or less, and 85% of the blue items are in this days or less. So you literally look at the chart, you lift the ruler off the page, and you can see, oh, these items don't take that long, historically speaking. I do that with my clients when, a few times a year, I look at their data and I reset the SLE based on the data rather than the guess. Now, the SLE, of course, will get worse if your system keeps aging and your cycle times keep getting worse. But if you want to set an accurate service level expectation, you should reflect what the current data says. So that's a single item, but then you can also forecast for multiple items, which is what the questioner was kind of hinting at, right? So what some people do is they say, well, how many items do we get to done, in this case, between shipped and review outcomes, how many items do we get to done at the end of a sprint? And so let's say you get 3 to 5 items done in a sprint. So you kind of say, well, can we do 3 to 5 items in this sprint? Well, what's coming in? And do that first question is, do these feel like they fit within our normal service level expectation for those items? In other words, we don't want to bring in an elephant, right? Size doesn't matter as much as you think, but it does matter a little bit because you don't bring in an elephant, right? That's kind of common sense, I think. So the team would say, well, okay, we're going to bring in 3 items. We're going to bring these in. And you can do that. But Little's law is what kind of underpins that, the relationship between how many items are in the system. Hopefully at the end of a sprint, nothing's in progress, everything's gone to done. The throughput, how many items you're delivering to done per sprint in this case, because we're talking about Scrum, and the cycle time, how long does it take for an item to get from here to get here. There is a kind of a triangular relationship, but there's also a set of assumptions as well, covered very well in Daniel Vicanti's Littlest Flaw video on Vimeo, if you want to check that out. I don't really like to use throughput for forecasting. It's better than story points. Did I say that word? Those words. Much better than that, but you're still using averages. And if you plan an average, yeah, you could succeed at average, but you can also fail an average. So it's, I don't know, not a great way to manage your career, I would say, right? 50-50 heads or tails. I'm not a fan of that. So what I prefer is that you use Monte Carlo probabilistic forecasting, even for the current sprint. I would say, okay, there's a bit of a too short a time horizon, but I still prefer to averages. It's just my personal preference, Reaction. And so what you can do is you can say, well, okay, let's look at what's our sprint goal likely to be, which items are likely to come in, and how many items is that? Okay, based on history, how many items do we deliver per sprint? And some sprints we only deliver 1, and some we deliver 5, and the odd occasion we deliver 6. And so what the random number generator will say, well, you deliver 1, you never have more than 6. Your backlog might be between this size and this size. It throws random numbers, usually 10,000 times. You can do it up to 1,000,000 times. And it plots out a histogram kind of ziggy-zaggy chart, and you kind of, it kind of plots out, might happen here. This is date down here. It might happen here. There's lots of occurrences here in this date here, and then it kind of has a kind of a tail or whatever. And a lot of people kind of go for here, the middle, but that's like 50-50 heads or tails. You should kind of move to the right-hand side of this histogram. Most people go for around here, around 85%. And so then based on that, you can say, well, 85% chance we deliver those items by the end of the sprint. I think it does help with trust. Remember in the complex space that even Monte Carlo probabilistic forecasting is still smoke and mirrors, but it's better than a vacuum. And Monte Carlo probabilistic forecasting isn't that useful if in your sprints, it's less useful if during your sprints you deliver every item on the last day of the sprint, because that would mean most days you deliver nothing. So when Monte Carlo is running, it says most of the time you have nothing, it's throughput, and then the odd time you have like 5 or 6 items that you deliver to done. And so it makes your forecast a little bit less reliable when you're like that. But I would still prefer to some alternative approaches. So getting back to the question then, so from a flow perspective, it would seem completing 85% of the work of items inside the sprint boundary would be a good thing and allow organization to trust a delivery of forecast, right? That was the question. I don't entirely agree. Scrum is goal-oriented. You have a product goal, you've got a sprint goal. The Scrum team, or the developers in particular, own the commitment to the sprint goal. And we really need to be trying to deliver on the sprint goal. The definition of done, I would argue, is a stronger commitment. And so, yes, while 85% probabilities does improve chances, I think it does help to improve trust, but trust improves really if you actually deliver on that. So whatever the forecast says, that's fine. But if it turns out in hindsight that the forecast seems to be kind of okay, people will start trusting it more. So I often find that even when I show Monte Carlo probabilistic forecasting, I show how reliable it has been in the past for the last 7 years or whatever, people don't tend to trust it until they see that it works in their situation. So I think really trust comes from, are we delivering, and are we effective, and are we being transparent, and all these kind of good things that you get from the 3 pillars of Scrum and the 5 Scrum values. So that's my nugget for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Reminder again that if you enjoy these, please donate to agilewithukraine.com. And if you have any burning topic that you'd like me to address, just comment on whichever channel you're on, and I'll take the question in. I won't mention your name. I'll just bring up the question. Okay, so your cover is good. All right, thank you so much, and have a lovely day.